All right, so one of the things that I want to start with is why I'm here. And at Exxon, we tend to use that word quite a bit. Why? Why are we here? Why are we doing it? Why this way? Why that way? We don't just jump on technology. We ask why. And if you look in your track, at the very last sentence it said, an organization that is changing and leveraging new technology. That's the only reason I'm here. Is because we are, for the very first time, going to build our CMMS system in the cloud. And if we've successfully done that for the last 8 months. We're excited about this endeavor, and we're willing to share with you some of the lessons learned. And we'll save some of those lessons learned when we sit down and have a roundtable discussion. Our primary project focus is to have a single point of reference for our assets. And that's an all-exhaustive list of things that we need. Everything from inventory, recommended spare parts list, maintenance plans, asset registers, dependencies, attributes, regulatory requirements, things that are relevant to the platform, easily accessible, not having to reach out to Houston and find out where is this information. We want it at the fingertips of our guys that are on the platform. They need the information in real time, that have a hard hat and steel-toe boots. A single point of reference, that's why. We're going to focus on, because our ERP system is SAP, these are the things that are important to us. So I took liberty with one of the SAP slides. I can do that. And focused on the things that are relevant to us that we're going to maintain in the cloud. And that is attributes associated with technical data. And these are very specific field and attribute values that are important to us. Technical data, equipment, parent-child relationships, BOMs, assemblies for kits, the network of technical objects, what's upstream, what's downstream, what's in parallel, what's main, what's standby, systems that are interoperating with those assets. We're also going to bring over our PMs. When do we do it? How often do we do it? Why do we do it? Who's going to work on it? What's the skill set required? What's the durations that are required? That's the information that we need at our fingertips on the platforms. Orders, what's the backlog? You've heard this repeatedly this morning, especially in this track, about KPIs and what we track and unscheduled work and routine work. Those things are important to us. So we will continue to use global practices to maintain our KPIs that are centric to ExxonMobil. And then finally, work centers and capacity. That's important because long are the days where we had platforms where we had over 100 people. We have to work smarter. We have to educate and inform our resources on the platform to be smarter resources. Okay. So that's the information that we went after. That was the why. Why do we need to do this? Because we need this information. It's important to us. Been doing it for many years. Our project requirements are for 2 platforms off St. John's. One is a brownfield remediation and one is a greenfield project. And the difference is, for those of you that this is a new term, is that greenfield is a new build. It's an $850 million project. It's a platform that will do first oil in 2017. CMMS system at 80% must be operational by 2015. Okay? That's the differentiator. We're not going to build the required information that we need prior to first oil. We must ensure that those systems are operational and we have what we need for those end users when we hand over to operations as early in the build as we can. Now, there are 3 words that Sandy mentioned design, procure, and build. And those have a direct relationship when we're building the CMMS system. Now, CMMS system is an acronym for, you can call it anything else you want. EAM, ALIM, it's been around for a while. But we work in concert with that development company. When they design, those decisions and those builds go directly into the CMMS system. When they procure, those manufacturer model and serial numbers go into the system. Okay? Of course, we've got other opportunities around the globe, but at this time, being ExxonMobil the way we are, we're not at liberty to provide that for you. But those we can broadcast to you. Those are two platforms that their CMMS system will be built entirely in the cloud. Why do we do this? To efficiently support the preparation and validation of quality data. Okay? Too many times we'll work with an EPC contractor, and how many of you have heard this? Well, we'll get the data to you. We'll get the data to you. Just so that I'm not the only one in the room, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard that line? Okay? We'll put a little humor into the presentation. We'll get it. Don't worry. We'll get it for you. First oil, 2017. We'll see you in 2017. No. We have a different set of requirements now that are now listed in the presentation. And these are some of the high-level ones. Support the preparation for validation and deployment of quality maintenance master data. And I'm going to run through these pretty quickly and then come back and hit you the premise for these. Leverage built-in supported data load methods for standardized maintenance data requirements. Wow, that sounds like a lot of words. The bottom line is that we want a method on how that information is going to get in. Okay, and you'll see in the presentation, we're not into access databases and Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and data sheets and boilerplate information. We need a process that is a repeatable process to get this information and validate it. It's important to us. Ensure that production organizations can manage the end-to-end business process of building, validating, and handing over accurate maintenance master data without having to deal with all these spreadsheets. How many of you have worked with an EPC contractor, and some of you are here in the room and have used Excel to be the medium on how you're going to create a system? By a show of hands. Just, you're not being recorded, you're not being filmed. I think that was a small percentage. I know there's more of you in here. But it seems that Microsoft Excel seems to be the choice for many, many, many years. Okay? Importing and leveraging existing maintenance master data through a repeatable standardized load. Okay? What does that mean? That means that for every production unit, every PU out there, there are requirements that must be met. Whether it's a manufacturer model serial number, whether it's a PM, whether it's regulatory, whether it's criticality, whether it's a strategy. Those things are requirements that mean something to that production unit. Okay? Those are the load templates. These are the discussions that we have early on. EPC, thou shalt provide this information in order to call that complete. Okay? So that scenario again plays out. First oil, 2017. Hey, this is what I got. This is what I got. No. This is what we get early on in the process. Managing workflows, approvals, and validations. Bottom line is we've got to do away with all this Excel spreadsheet and access database. We need a very structured way to say, when Bob finished all the PMs and the strategies and the asset registers, this was the end result. There's a workflow. There's an auditable process to be able to go back and reflect where those changes are. Why is this important? It's really not an FYI. I know some of you are nodding your head going, I get it now. What it is that in the design, there are a lot of design changes that impact. So imagine 2017 first oil. How many of you, by a show of hands, believe there's going to be more than one design decision to that platform? Okay? Exactly, right? It's going to happen. And what happens, with the old processes that we have in place, a lot gets lost in translation, right? So you're looking at the revisions, you've got the asset register, you got the engineering docs, you've got the P&IDs, you're looking at them, revision, 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 and you find that there's 15 drafts, but there's only really 2 revisions. Now, a lot of that gets lost in translation, right? So as Sandy said, design, procure, and build. And we want to be lockstep with the development team in production. Okay? So the end state goal, so again, we ask ourselves why. Is it because we want to have great KPIs? Is it because we want to be able to showcase how much information we're able to load into the system? Is it because we work closely with EPCs? Is the whys and the whys and the whys and the whys? The end state goal is exactly as I've documented in the presentation. And that is the ability to, the guy with the hard hat, the guy with the steel toe shoes, having the ability to use the system and that information at his fingertips. Okay? Not in a catalog, not in a control book, easily accessible information. So I'm getting back to why I'm here. Because the technology that we're going to use for these 2 platforms is going to be, and it has been, built in the cloud. We've seen it. We can get that information at their fingertips in real time. Loving it, as they say on TV. Loving it. Okay? This is why the system should address all the resources involved, maintain the hierarchy inventory. How many of you have worked with spare parts team and been on a project only to find out when you actually handed over to operations you were actually not there? Is that a common theme amongst participants here? That's happened to you? It's happened to us. Right? So what do? We hand over to operations and then we're scrambling looking for spare parts. It's not like we can just go down the street and we can go talk to a vendor. We're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere. We're in God knows where around the globe. Right? So we've got to consider long lead materials, transportation cost. All of these factors have to be defined and readily built into the CMMS system. Okay? So the conceptual view of CMMS that we took, sharing with you a little bit about our project for Hebron, Greenfield, Hibernia, Brownfield remediation, was the 3 areas that we had to focus on because Exxon uses SAP. We had to rely on some of the building blocks that are associated with CMMS inside of SAP. Right? And these are the conceptual things that are inside of SAP. Master data, class and characteristics, we all know that. You know, what is it? Oh, it's a pump. Okay, what kind? Centrifugal. Okay, we need that type of information in the system. FLOCs, virtual areas, cost codes, maintenance work centers, et cetera, et cetera. So this was one of the whys. Why are we getting that information in that particular form and template? And it was because when it comes to CMMS, these are the 3 building blocks that we needed to make sure we had the information for. All right? So the conceptual view is master data, planning information, and order processing information. We have to ensure that the product that we're using in the cloud, and in this case Hubhead, Asset Hub, that portal and that software had all of the elements that we needed to have a successful CMMS build. Okay? Conceptual view may include app that allows operators to enter and track location of equipment. Some of this stuff is rudimentary. It's been around a long time. Make sure we keep the equipment accurate. Regulatory items, safety, lockout, tagout procedures, safety plans, etc., etc. Okay? And last but not least, key performance indicators. So I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but those are the whys that we need to ensure that our product has. Okay, so let me get down to the meat of the presentation. And I'll spend a few minutes on this one more than I did with the others. The primary challenge was that we had a lot of best-of-breed products. Everybody did what they did very well. Everybody had a niche. And I'll explain what those niches are. Strategies and criticality assessment. by the engineering firm. And there you'll see it. We use Meridian. And their charter is to determine and define, based on the class and characteristic and the model and where they are in the design, to determine the criticality, and then to determine the strategy of how often we're going to perform that maintenance and at what intervals are being recommended. So they're best of breed. They're working with the ExxonMobil engineers to determine and create a database of these assets all over the globe. So the last thing you want to do is create a hybrid, create a clone, create a copy. You want to leverage their ability to do what they do best. Okay? Then we had to deal with spare parts. And we also had another partner that we had in that, and that was Riversand. Now I'm specifically talking about the platform Hebron/Hibernia. And there they used Riversand to determine all of their sparing. Okay, so the recommended spare parts list, inventory items, the procurement of those inventory items, making sure they got issued, make sure they got received, make sure those packages made its way back into procurement on the ERP side. And this is what they do. And they're the best at doing that. And then we have some smart plant. We have InTools for instrumentation. Then we had the engineering files for all of the asset registers that defined all the assets that were in that design. And then last but not least, we had and have the configuration and master data associated with that ERP system. And this is really important that you guys get the connection here. So the Asset Hub tool allowed us to have all this information in one centralized place while keeping these best-of-breed products to do what they do best. Okay? Not to copy, not to clone, but to allow the information to be leveraged inside the tool. That was the premise. In the cloud, all the information available with one login ID, a set of credentials that allowed you to look at the information for those assets. Okay? So this was our challenge. How do we get these best-of-breed products consistently into one platform? And this is what we chartered off last year to do. Okay? The diagram that's in the center, and I intentionally made it really small so nobody could see the actual names at the bottom, and I'm hoping I made it small enough. I think I drew a line through it so you couldn't see it, so I had to scrub it. Was an analysis that we did to determine the attributes associated with every past greenfield project to look at the data. So we did an analysis. We said, okay, let's sit down. Let's look at quantitative data and let's look at qualitative data. Let's look at the attributes that are important to an organization. I'm just going to pick on one, manufacturer model serial number, just to keep it simple. So you go back and you go, wait, manufacturer, that changed 5 years ago. Okay, were there any changes to the record? There's no changes to the record. So as far as we knew, we were still ordering the old stuff, which caused the delay, yada, yada. You guys get it. It's a domino effect right there. But we noticed that we had great global practices. We had the mechanics. The mechanics in terms of process. We have really smart people that are good at what they do. We had an overabundance of methodology that could be leveraged as a go-by, lessons learned, as a charter itself, as an implementation plan, as a roadmap. But we consistently would come up short in the quality of the attributes being selected. And it was the tool. It was the tool. Because you had 5 major veins coming to you to build this system, and every one of them had a different timetable. Every one of them had a different focus on what they needed to do. If you were providing in-tools information, instrumentation information, that's what you were focused on. You were good at that. If you were doing spare parts, that's what you were doing. All you needed was the asset register to tell you, I need a bill of material for this item, go. And that's what you would do. If you were engineering, you were determining that what is the criticality based on the design and determining what the strategy would be to maintain this asset over its life cycle. That's what you were doing. What was SAP doing? And in this case, well, they were going to the IMG, right? They were creating a new plant, creating a new warehouse, creating new material masters, creating new work centers, creating new order types, all the things that they rudimentary do. But somewhere in that mix, not all the pieces were coming together to look at the build. Now, why is that important? It's a variety of reasons why it's important. But why is it important to us? Is because when we hand over to operations probably had 90 days to 5 months to 6 months to get prepared. Right? So they're on the platform as far as they know. They've got engineering firm. They've got a development team taking care of the spare parts. We've got the strategy. It's in good hands. And it gets there. It gets into the ERP system. But by then it's a little too late. They can't visualize it. They can't see it. And that's why we made a change. So we reached out to our supplier, Asset Hub, and we sat down, we had a few workshops, and we determined that what we needed to do was to have a visualization, a graphical representation of all of these best-of-breed products working cohesively together and physically looking at a structure and see it come to life. I can't explain it any simpler than that. To look at an asset, whether it's a top-tier machinery, whether it's just a simple pump, and look at it take shape and take form in terms of criticality, the sparing, the PMs, the attributes, any documentation associated with it. Okay? And I'm just going to go ahead and, I'm at the end of my presentation, so yay. Okay? I'm just going to go right to it. Okay? So how do we do this? And it's a little difficult to see, and I apologize because you're sitting a little bit too far away, and I believe the presentation will be made available in some form or fashion. But we've got 4 phases. And the 4 phases, we borrowed the terminology from our supplier. And I'm going to say borrow, because we're going to start putting some of that information in our doctrine and our global practices. Is to, listen to this, is to acquire the information, to build the information, to validate the information, and finally to deploy the information. And I gave credit where credit was due. Okay, just so we're clear on that. So acquire the information, important for CMMS builds, for greenfield projects. Build the information with those best of practices vendors, right? Best of breed products. Validate that the information actually meets the criteria for that platform. And finally, once it's approved, once it's been audited, once we look at that it actually passes the smell test, and that means we've had the disciplines look at it, that it gets deployed into an ERP system. Now, remember back in slide 1, I said, first oil, and I've got to hone that in to share with you, first oil 2017. No longer. With the cloud and this technology, we're now looking at the build in real time as it starts to take shape. We're looking at the ability of these design changes take shape. Okay. So how do we do that? It's the bottom piece that I want to really focus on. An easy-to-use portal platform for new projects and existing PU, so brownfield organizations. And so what do? We acquire the data. What does this mean, acquire the data? Well, we're taking that asset register and we're starting to look at the EPCs of the world, start to provide engineering data, boilerplate information, supplier, manufacturer, etc. And we're starting to build that information in those little structures inside of the tool. And we start to see that structure just take place. And we continually acquire and build the data. Well, what is that? Why do we do that? Well, because the engineering firm that's responsible for the build is working with its vendors and information is coming in. Okay? So it's a straight pass-through, right? EPC gets it, we turn around and get the same load file in the template model that we suggested early on in the build. And it starts to build this structure. Okay? Validation, transformation, implementation. A whole bunch of words to simply say, if I say manufacture is a requirement as an attribute, then manufacture is a requirement in that attribute. So when we go and look at the build and it's sitting at 36%, the product will turn around and let us know exactly where those faults are. Okay? And then finally, exporting. We're using programs that have been around for a long time, the LSMW programs, because we are an SAP shop. We're using LSMW programs to load this information into a QAS environment, and we'll perform a unit test, make sure we'll do a good, healthy check on it. And then if there are any tweaks or changes, we'll make sure we make those changes inside the cloud, inside the Asset Hub tool, and then finally we'll load it into an ERP production environment for the operations team to commence to use it.